Should Māori have a separate criminal justice system? Our current criminal justice system isn't working. Māori take up 15% of the entire New Zealand population and 51% of the prison population. This overrepresentation of Māori requires discussion into why this is happening and where to go from here. Moana Jackson believes that a parallel or separate criminal justice system specifically for Indigenous people will help decrease the population in the prisons. We are going to be discussing the reasons why there should be conversation around this issue by giving historical context into why Māori became overrepresented in all areas of the criminal justice system. As in many colonial settler societies, the process of colonisation meant the cultural, political and social oppression of the Indigenous population. According to Canine and Todi, the purpose of colonisation is to civilise, Christianise and assimilate the Indigenous people so they may become Europeanised. In understanding the root of crime, we have to understand the whakapapa or genealogy of contemporary Māori. During colonisation, the Indigenous people suffered severe loss of land, especially during the 1860s land wars. Some tribes, such as Ngāti Awa, became spiritually damaged and geographically dispersed. Disparities such as the loss of land are what influence the intergenerational trauma that is arguably the largest contributing factor of the overrepresentation of Māori in our justice systems. Those who determine what ought to be seen as right and wrong are called the state. This body of lawmakers exercise a level of social power that exert authority through political means. We may argue that our current state of governing is a derivative of the European settlers who formed the then government that exerted a level of power over the Indigenous people. Through the violation of the treaty and the passing of bills, the state became the foundation of our current racialized political climate, which, in turn, has severely affected the way in which our Indigenous people are processed in the criminal justice system. So, with the power to determine what is right and wrong, they also determine what is a crime and who is criminal. Criminal law is based on cultural ideas which influence lawmakers in determining what is and isn't a crime. Moana Jackson argues that there are two issues that arise in defining what is right and wrong. The definition of a specific crime is what the state deems to be unlawful, but the context in which this crime is committed also renders attention because the reasons for a crime being committed is just as prominent as the crime itself. Both the crime and what led the crime to be executed are both based on the perceptions of cultural, political, and social ideas at the time. So in order to understand the origins of Indigenous crime, we must view crime from an historical perspective. We argue that the origin of Māori's rebellion against Pakeha is the violation of Article 2 of the Treaty of Waitangi. The disregard of rangatiratanga perpetuated an intergenerational wave of rebellion among the Pan-Māori movement. Their grievances were not limited to just land, but their anger involved the European settlers abusing their authoritative power over the people. Honiheke cutting down the flagstaff at Kororareka was a historical act of utu that influences even the contemporary post-colonial discussions over why Māori ought to fight for the reclaiming of their land. The introduction of new penal systems put in place did not align with Māori values and beliefs.
This was an issue. Our current criminal justice system is weighted towards a Western approach. Our current legal system follows the adversarial model, taking an offender versus the state stance. Legal parties represent and speak for their representative clients, and a jury panel judges based on the information provided and gives their verdict. However, in using representatives, this method removes the offender's voice. In addition to this, there is an unfortunately high level of racial bias in New Zealand, whether it be conscious or unconscious. As a result of this racialized hierarchy, acts such as over-policing of ethnically inhabited areas are extremely common, with this over-policing often resulting in a dangerous reputation. With this constant panopticism of Indigenous peoples, the chances of any kind of criminal behaviour going unnoticed is incredibly slim, whilst areas that are less policed due to an absence of racial profiling are able to easily avoid criminal repercussions. So whilst policing is required to reproduce order, focusing predominantly on ethnically prominent areas makes it difficult to say the reproducing of order is being distributed fairly. This is easily confirmable if we look at statistics for Indigenous peoples that show whilst they make up a small percentage of the population, they fill over half of New Zealand's prison population. But as a country, we have begun to reroute away from a colonised criminal justice approach and towards a more Indigenous way of dealing with crime. The introduction of wardens to communities has helped both bridge the gap between the police and the public, as well as working alongside the police. Made up of volunteers that ethnically align with their communities, they act as an added safety presence. New Zealand has also begun steering towards a more restorative justice system, which takes a step away from the representatives and hiding behind legal parties and focuses on the offender and the victim. This slots into the three justice principles, demonstrating that restorative justice is a more appropriate method of criminal justice to use for Indigenous peoples. New Zealand's steer towards a more restorative justice system brings in the idea of confronting the issue face to face rather than hiding behind a legal professional. This links into the first principle of relationality.
Kanohi kete kanohi is the Māori idea
of being face to face to allow the persons involved to feel the words and allows for a better gauge of seeing and feeling true remorse. Balance, the second principle, also ties into this, as the idea states that when balance is upset, there needs to be an attempt to restore, repair, and heal. This ties in with restorative justice as it allows both parties to address the harm caused and make an attempt at coming to a place of emotional and physical agreement. Elder leadership, the third principle, focuses on connectedness and having a place of justice. Just as this method is a more personal way of initiating a justice between the two parties involved. In conclusion, we need a criminal justice system that understands the effect colonization has had on Indigenous people and alter accordingly. Restorative justice is a step in the right direction towards the Indigenous method, but it really only accessible at this stage through the Western adversarial model. The same criminal justice system applies equality between both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, but this is not demonstrated in our crime statistics.
A separate justice system for Māori
is a greater step towards achieving equity, not equality, in our society.